And this next section is where we get into the expensive equipment, as we go through the process of digitizing the films and getting them online. But first, let's take a step back and talk about why we digitize film, and even if we should digitize film, starting with the difference between film and video, as what we do when we digitize film is transform it into video. I always say that if film and video were set up on a date, they wouldn't necessarily have much to talk about. The matchmaker would be like, "Film, you are going to love video. You two have so much in common. You both love movies." And sure, they're both analog moving image formats, but beyond that, film is translucent while video is opaque. We can look at a film reel and see the actual image, tell if it has sound or not, and find the date that it was manufactured, while looking at a video reel doesn't tell us much. It's organized data on magnetic tape, giving instructions to a machine to beam out scan lines that give the impression of a picture. Film is a picture. If you magnified film, you would see light shining through beautiful crystals of color suspended in gelatin. With video, you would see a wall of rust. And there are also differences in the images created by each. Film is a set of single, simple pictures, while video uses interlacing, running two alternating fields of scan lines for each image to conserve bandwidth. And the speeds are different. Sound film universally moves at 24 frames per second, while analog video in America was about 30 frames per second, and video abroad about 25. An image on a film is permanent, save vinegar syndrome, while video was sold in part because it could be recorded over, as Doctor Who fans know. But on the flip side, video isn't prone to color shift like film, but when its image does degrade, it does not go gracefully. And video, like all magnetic tape, is an impermanent medium that needs to be refreshed every decade, while film on the right stock in proper storage conditions can last for more than half a century. So film archivists and advocates have been pushing back on the idea that video can replace or be a surrogate to film since the 60s, and they've always been right. But just now, as theater chains transition to digital, they're losing ground. And what about digital video compared to film? It might be contained on spinning hard drives or magnetic backup tape, but it's still just as opaque, needs a machine to be read, and is easy to delete. Digital video files also have the possibility of corrupting over time, and this problem is compounded with compression. Too complex to get into here, but another important layer between you and your video files. While film is one of the most mature media formats with over 100 years of steady use and refinement, digital video is the least mature of digital media formats because it was too large for most computers to deal with. They didn't have a fast enough throughput to handle all the data, and not enough storage to be able to keep it. Compared to the life of digital audio, which made a simple move from PCM signals on a tape to PCM WAV files that are bit-for-bit copies of the earlier tapes with an added header, to our current standard of broadcast WAV files, which are all the same with just a little more info in the header, archival digital video, especially tapeless, has not really been a thing until recently, when storage costs have gotten low enough and computers have gotten fast enough, which leaves us with years of proprietary compression schemes to navigate, and especially for film advocates, an untrustworthy history for the permanence of digital files. In my opinion, uncompressed is an answer. As opposed to compression, file encoding for uncompressed is much more straightforward, doesn't require a complex codec to be read, and actually captures the full quality of the original, without educated computer guesses about the image and its color. So if you resave a file, as we're told we'll always eventually need to do for migration, no information is lost, unlike a JPEG where resaving becomes a guess of a guess. But the file size isn't trivial. When we use DV compression for video, our files were 13 gigabytes an hour, while our uncompressed files are closer to 120 gigabytes. But once archives have gone uncompressed, as with audio and photos, we've tended to stick with it, and storage costs continue to decline. Still, you should know that there is no archival digital video format standard yet, but I keep diligently checking FADGI, hoping but not waiting. So hopefully you can see why film preservationists have a right to be concerned about preserving film on digital video. And you should know that the current consensus among moving image archivists is that film is best preserved on film. This is unlike magnetic media, which should be transferred as soon as possible, with things getting dire and expensive after 2025. The problem with making prints of film is that it's really expensive. Last time I checked, it was at least $1,000 per reel, which marginalizes film not already part of a canon and doesn't increase access. If I were just now putting together our digitization program, film would not be my top priority for equipment, but here we are. If you can wait, maybe you should. More equipment and standards are coming. The problem, though, is that vinegar syndrome is irreversible, and films that are playable now might not be in 10 years. If I were starting over with unlimited money, I would survey all my films, stabilize their storage, and add silica to slow vinegar syndrome, then send any films with moderate or worse vinegar syndrome to a vendor with a sprocketless scanner, letting the rest of the films wait until standards, equipment, and storage costs were more settled. All this is to say that what we are doing here is digitizing for access, not preservation. But the copies we make are of a high enough quality to be broadcast and used in documentary films, and that is a really big deal, because more than half of my AV researchers that come on site are looking for footage for documentaries. And that's what we're doing here, giving our films a chance to be seen and discovered through digitization, and finding what could be worthy of the gold standard of film-on-film preservation at the same risk of damage as running film through a projector, which isn't trivial. So with that, let's talk about the machine we use here, as the machine defines the digitizations we make and the decisions we make in deciding what elements to digitize. Here at the Briscoe, we have the Movie Stuff Sniper 16 HD, which retailed for $10,000. And that price might shock you, but this is actually a low-end machine. The next step up is Blackmagic's upcoming Cintel at $30,000, but that has sprockets and tops out at UHD quality. After that, we step into the realm of digital preservation with the FlashScan scanners. They don't publish their prices, but seem to be in the $45,000 to $90,000 range. And finally, the Kineta scanner, which retails at $100,000. It's easy to balk at prices like this, but keep in mind that the most expensive component of digitization is the manpower, and only having to digitize a single time is cheaper in the long run. You're also getting a higher level of service with these machines. I've had some tough times with Movie Stuff customer service, and their perspective is not long-term, evidenced by keeping their manuals online only and recently discontinuing repair of machines less than 3 years old. And Blackmagic is known for great prices, but not really great communication with customer service. The owners of Kineta and FlashScan are highly reputable, with Jeff Krines of Kineta Scan publishing papers on film digitization, obviously with a penchant for promotion but still quality contributions, and Ted Langdell of FlashScan being the long-standing secretary for the Quad Videotape Group, which documents the workflows and equipment for the most endangered AV format, 2-inch quadruplex tape. But the Movie Stuff is what we have, and it's hard to argue with the cost-benefit ratio of these machines. It's an ingenious design, repurposing a Bell & Howell projector, then adding a platform to hold that and a camera. And instead of projecting the film, it's backlighting it and shooting that image with the camera. And the crux of the machine is the Cinecat Velocity program that emulates mouse clicks for every frame of film. With the Sniper, this is truly where the magic happens. Rather than trying to use a still camera and snap a picture every frame, which would break most cameras in a few reels, it uses a video camera for continuous motion, but only keeps the frames where the film is in the gate. To do this, it emulates a mouse click for each frame, telling the software, which was originally made for stop-motion animation, to keep the image from each click. This allows the film to be processed at any frame speed, decoupled from the rate of transfer. And what I love about this machine is that it's inexpensive, records sound, and gives us HD progressive scan files. What I don't like is that it has sprockets and has issues with sound, both in cutting off parts of audio during synchronization, recording only in mono no matter the source material, and being stuck at 16-bit rather than 24. I also don't like that the whole system is dependent on proprietary software from a separate developer who seems like he could disappear at any time. And the software doesn't do basic things like show audio levels or report drop frames during capture, and requires a custom-built PC for support, with parts that are now out of production and still doesn't work perfectly, as we'll see during capture. The Sniper also requires a fair amount of skill to use, as the focus, framing, and lighting all require hand adjustment for decent results. Also, since we've gotten the HD upgrade, I haven't been able to get the backlight low enough to capture film without blowing out the highlights. After we bought this, Movie Stuff made a new line called the Retro Scan, which lowers the price to $4,500 and loses the sprockets, but also no longer has the ability to capture sound. So we know the machine's pros and cons. Let's see how it affects our choices on what to digitize. With the sprocket machine, it's most compatible with a finished print, as those are likely to have some damage already and probably aren't one-of-a-kind items. And as you'll see, prints are a lot less hassle to facilitate access for. Just digitize, process, and you're all set. For this set of films, we didn't have prints, so we want to get as much of the information transferred in the fewest steps, to avoid potential damage to the films and to keep our project within the budget. Let's start with the sound elements. We have full coat mag stock reels of the entire soundtrack and negative optical sound reels. As I've covered, this machine can't play full coat mag stock film, and if we could get it digitized, the sync isn't great, so we won't use that. Luckily, our machine seems to play back negative optical sound film the same as positive, so that's our best choice for sound. Now for picture elements. We have the inner negative, which is the item the print was made from, and the inner positive, which is one generation previous. Here's the digitization quandary. The earlier the generation, the more quality we're getting, but also the more intention we lose from the creator. It was pretty common for color changes to have been made from the inner positive to inner negative. However, our decision is made by our equipment. The sniper can technically process color negative film, but it doesn't turn out great and requires a lot of post-processing to make it look close to natural. For that reason, with our specific machine, we end up reinterpreting the creator's color intention more than if we had just gone with the inner positive. So the best choice for our circumstances is to digitize the inner positive. So for sound, we'll select our optical rails, and for picture, our inner positive. And we're not selecting our full coat mag stock or inner negative film rails. And since we digitized everything, let's see if we made the right decisions.
Similarly, we consider three other right triangles into which the original square was divided and give their similar translations we shall get in each case. Similarly, we consider three other right triangles into which the original square was divided and give their similar translations we shall get in each case. Similarly, we consider three other right triangles into which the original square was divided and give their similar translations we shall get in each case.
Not bad at all. So those films were captured in DV quality, standard definition composites that we made before we got our HD upgrade. In those line drawings especially, you can see how sad it is to put film through the video interlacing process. Just for comparison, here's what it looks like now with our HD progressive captures. Much better. So here's what I need to do with the sniper before I'm capturing a reel. I'm using the first inner positive reel here. I'm going to put on some gloves. And I'm going to grab this guy from the can and put it onto the split reel. So I hold it super tight, once again, as if my life depended on it, because my afternoon definitely does. I'm going to drop it on this reel, which has the knob. Grab the top of the split reel, put that on there. I can take off the tape. And then I'm going to add this to the supply side of the sniper. Lock it in there. You'll notice that the wind is on the outer right-hand side as opposed to the outer left-hand side. And I've got the glossy side of the film on the outside, the emulsion side on the inside, sprockets facing towards me. And if I had a soundtrack, I would want that on the edge facing away from me. But this reel is image only, so there's sprockets on both edges. So now I just need to thread the film through the projector and get it to the take-up reel on the left-hand side. So first I'm going to unspool enough film to get us through the path. And then we're going to thread the film through the path. Every projector is different, but they're all kind of similar. So we're going to go on this one under the first set of rollers, as this guy tells you. And then up over the first set of sprockets, under the second roller, and then over this very crucial roller, which I call the claw. Now we're going to take it right through the gate, and then under this first roller, which is another crucial roller. Then we're going to bring it right through the middle of this pair, and then in between the optical sound head, and then we're going to rock it underneath these guys, and then over the next set of sprockets, underneath this next roller, and then over the last roller. And then we take that out, get it onto the take-up reel, and then we're going to fit it right into a slot in here. There's a little slot designed just for film, and it has found its home. Get it in there, and then I'm going to hold with my thumb or a finger on that film that's in the slot and get it around at least one time to where it can hold itself. You'll notice when I'm doing this that I'm breaking some of the rules that I've said about film handling. I'm totally touching it with my thumbs and getting my thumbprints on it. This is leader. That's what it's for. It's the time when you really have to handle the film. So I don't think it's a terrible thing. So we've got that around once. Now I'll pull a little bit more. And then I'm going to come back to the claw and give myself some loop. Now if you don't know, unlike audio tape transports, which are all about keeping the tape flat against the playback head and play back with continuous motion, motion picture uses the Latham loop, which is all about keeping slack around the gate where the image is projected, or in our case captured from. So I'm going to go ahead and give a little slack here on the claw, and then give a little bit more slack on the bottom. And then I'm going to put the projector into play mode. And this is basically locking in to the sprockets at this point. You'll notice that everything kind of comes together when I put it into play mode. Just like that. And that's where you can really see the Latham loop. You can see that while everything else has constant tension, from the sprockets on to the supply reel, and then from the take-up reel past the sprockets, lots of tension there. More tension for the sound head to get it flat. But then once it comes out of these rollers, it's got slack, and the film is almost playing back as if suspended in air. The Latham loop is even more important for the sniper, because if we lose our loop, the film tightens on the rollers, which causes the projector to shut down to protect damage to the film. But in the process, the film is always damaged, and the digitization is either stopped or interrupted. So that's why I add some extra loop. And we can actually see what that damage looks like. Right before it shuts off, the film is pulling down against the rollers, pulling the film through the sprockets, which causes tears in the film, wrinkling, and damages the emulsion. This would not happen with a sprocketless scanner. And this looks terrible, because it is. But also keep in mind that this is 1/12 of a second. Alright, now, for the video camera, I need to set the focus, framing, and brightness. This is not unskilled labor, and you'll see that a lot of choices are being made here. Let me show you an example of how much variance you can get. This was an actual turned-in digitization from before I started at the Briscoe, made by someone who had experience with film. But they didn't have experience with this machine, so they went way too bright, lost detail, and for the focus, I have no idea what they were doing. To set my focus, framing, and brightness, I'm always going to advance the film, past the leader, and count down to the actual program material. Then I find a good representative scene, and put the projector into play mode. And when I do this, you can see the whole film path, and you can see what happens when I hit play mode. All the rollers come down to force the film onto the sprockets, and the gate closes to allow for accurate focus. And as I was taught by Afshin Nomai of the Texas Archive of Moving Image, when we're focusing on film for digitization, what you want to focus to is the grain. You can lose a lot of time trying to focus to something that isn't. And there's no way that you can know that the creator or the camera person who originally shot this had everything in perfect focus. So all you've got to do is see what the grain's doing. Because the mental model is, we're not trying to focus to the subjects on the screen. We're trying to focus to the actual film. So all I'm doing when I focus is picking a spot on the screen and getting that as sharp as I can get it. And then just like an eye exam, I'm going back and forth from that just a little bit to make sure I've got it at its sharpest. Once I feel like I have a pretty good sense, I'm going to pick another point. So you can see it's still a little blurry up there. I'm trying to get those both so that I'm not losing focus on my old spot. I'm looking for that sweet spot where the depth of field of the camera is matching the depth of the film. I think that's it. Alright, now framing. The basic part is making sure that we don't have the top of the frame too high or too low, which will cause a split in the image. We're going to use these fine-tuning adjustments on the base for height. That looks about right. I'm going to err on getting a flatter line on top as opposed to the bottom. But now, the more complex part. Using the zoom of the HD camera, we can change how much of our film we're covering. And it might seem like an easy choice. I've been on the record myself as saying we want everything all the time. But with framing, there's some give and take to framing the entire film as opposed to the image area. The give is that if you pull back, you get more of the physicality of the film. And if we could get all the way back, there would be the chance that you could get the actual optical soundtrack. But the take is that you're losing resolution the further you zoom out. So for these films, and every other one that I've seen in our collection of 16mm films, there's no extra information on the sprocket side. And since we're capturing the sound from our optical reader, and our resolution is already a little lower than I'd like, I feel okay about just capturing the traditional picture area. But even this brings some interpretation. The full frame is not necessarily what the camera person was seeing. And you'll even see that there may have been dust around the gate, which is not intended to be seen. So what do we do? For me, I've decided to err on the side of capturing the full picture area. I'm not comfortable with cropping the image and making interpretations about what was supposed to be seen. And it's always possible for someone to make a derivative with a cropped image down the line. But if the image is cropped during digitization, it's gone. So we're just going to adjust that a little bit, get that centered vertically. And then we can also move horizontally and make adjustments. I'm going to pull in just a little bit. And I feel good right there. And finally, there's brightness. Movie Stuff encourages users to use their auto brightness feature and capture films without monitoring, but those are terrible ideas for archives. Luckily, they also give us a knob for manually adjusting brightness, though since our HD upgrade, it hasn't been able to get as low as I'd like without showing flickering and kind of blacking out sections of the movie. So what I'm looking for here is I want to get the highlights, or whitest part of the film, not to be confused with the sprocket holes, but the actual image area. I want to get those white parts to show grain. If that detail is blown out or too bright to be seen, it's gone forever. But at the same time, there's a balance. If the film is too dark, detail is lost in the shadows or darkest parts of the film. As Jeff Krines, the inventor of Kinetiscan, says, the goal in scanning is to capture all of the dynamic range present in the film, not to create a pretty or even appealing image. This is a good thing for us, because color grading requires an amazing amount of talent and is way beyond our scope as archivists. I think that's about right. Once we have all these set, I try not to change them during digitization, but there are points where the film jumps in the frame or the brightness changes suddenly between scenes and live adjustments have to be made. Focus does tend to stay the same. So now we're going to go ahead and rewind the film all the way past the original leader because again, we want to digitize everything on this reel. So we need to name the capture with a unique identifier if we have it, or I use a box number and rough title if not. Luckily we have one for this one. I'm going to grab E, which we use as a convention to state that it's a collection in the identifier name, and then math. And then I would have an underscore here, but it won't let me add one. But for now, I'll put in 01204. And then to start, all I need to do is press start on this, and then right after, turn on the motor switch to begin the capture. And here we go. Start, motor switch. And we're off. You'll notice that I always start the recording on the computer just before I turn on the analog item. You always want to capture everything that the analog item has, so you err on the side of the digital recording everything. Just saw a punch hole. See that? That's the part we could have framed to, and we would have been wrong. You see that line on the bottom? The leader does not always match the film. And once again, this focus frame, not quite right compared to the actual film. It's a little bit lower there. And now we're to the actual program material. When looking at the monitors, you might notice some strange waves moving up and down in the picture. This is pull down and comes from the speed difference between the original film and the video camera that we're recording it with. And there are two sets of clicks that you're hearing. On the left channel is the optical sound reader trying to read the sprockets of the silent film. So it sounds like bop, 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 bop. And then on the right channel is the mouse click emulation, which just happens to sound almost exactly the same. I also use this sound to tell if the capture program has dropped frames, since there's no air recording in the software. And while I'm capturing, I'm usually taking time notes or working on metadata for the film. But more than anything, I'm watching and listening to make sure nothing goes wrong. And right there, you can see that it dropped frames. So this is going to have to be recaptured. So we're going to go ahead and restart that, take it from the top, and do a new capture. Alright, and we're back. We're capturing again. And this time everything seems to be going smoothly. And then we're just going to keep doing this until the end of the film. And at the end of the reel, we're going to let it digitize all the way to the end of the film until the tail literally passes the gate, and only then do we stop the digitization. So first, I'm going to stop the computer since the film is already completed. So I press stop, and then I'm going to turn the motor off on the projector, and then we'll check our file. I'm going to process this at 24 frames per second in HD. And now we wait. So now, the CineCap program will pull the mouse click frames and give us a processed video file that plays back at the speed we told it to. But where did I get that specific speed from? For sound film like this, it's easy. 24 frames per second, standardized since 1930. But for silent film, there's more variety and interpretation happening. Most films made after sound was standardized for motion pictures are 18 frames per second. But if a photographer normally shot sound film, like Houston photographer Bob Bailey, their silent films tend to be 24 frames per second. Here's an example of doing it wrong, from a film collection we have from the LCRA that was put on VHS by a transfer house in the 90s. If I had to guess, the transfer house thought that since it was old black and white film, it should look old-timey, like the hand-crank comedies of the 20s and earlier. And with a wave of the hand, something shot majestically could end up looking silly. Again, anything you don't know about the significant properties of your source format is at risk during transfer. During digitization or any migration, it's easy to lose what you don't know you have. The way you get the speed right is looking at people jumping, rivers flowing, physics, to see if things look natural. If you have experimental films, all bets are off. But for the film we just digitized, in this entire collection, it's easy. I'm processing to 24p, which is a true 24 frames per second to match the film, rather than video's usual 23.97 equivalent. Two other things are happening when CineCap processes the raw file. The image is cropped to just the section in the yellow lines that I framed to, and the sound is synchronized to the picture. Both of these are a little problematic. The cropping leaves black bars on the side of the file, rather than just changing the aspect ratio and keeping the frame section. It's disappointing because it eats up storage for no reason, and I prefer to have an option to keep the sprocket holes in soundtrack rather than just blank space. More seriously, the movie stuff adds some glitches to the audio during synchronization, so what was smooth and continuous during capture is now broken up, with small sections of audio missing to conform to the speed of the film. So the raw capture has been processed, and we now have a second file, which is what goes into our digital media repository. It's a motion JPEG wrapped at between 60 and 80 gigabytes per hour, compressed by the software, unfortunately. And in most cases, I am getting rid of that first raw capture file, but there are some eggs being broken here. The audio is no longer continuous, the speed is no longer reversible, and the image is cropped to the section I framed to. But unless I have problems during capture or feel unsure about the frame rate, I just can't justify the cost of storing two HD copies of the same film at 80 gigabytes per hour. And I also haven't been able to reprocess raw files made on the old version of Cinecap with the new, so I don't have faith that the raw files will be useful into the future. What I am starting to do is pull the audio from the raw file at less than a gigabyte per hour and save that in case somebody using a clip in a documentary wants to resynchronize that without the movie stuff processing glitches. It's way out of the scope of traditional researchers, but production can never really be separate from AV archives. And when I said problems during capture, what do I mean? I'm talking about those rare cases where the projector loses loop or shuts down and it's not feasible to go back and recapture the entire film. The process file won't clearly show those problems during capture since it syncs by frame, and frames aren't moving when the projector stops. So we keep the raw file in these cases to show a record of the capture and note the time that the problem occurred. It's kind of a pain to do, but we're an archive, and authenticity matters. And let's talk about authenticity. With magnetic media, it's generally agreed that the digital objects we create will outlast the original media. So that's informed our policy for all AV at the Briscoe, which I think is a good thing. When we present a digital object, unless the metadata clarifies differently, what we're saying is that this is a single pass of digitization, from the beginning of the source media to the end. And to be clear, sometimes we trim the ends of files when we record it after playback has stopped, and in rare cases we trim the beginning of a file when we start recording too soon. But the thing that we never, ever do is trim the middle of the file, because that would affect authenticity. In the audio world, there's no project that has had more scrutiny or money spent on recovery than the missing 18 minutes of the Richard Nixon tapes. With digital files, things are even more treacherous, because instead of leaving an obvious blank space in the middle of recording, or a splice to show the changes were potentially made, a section of digital media could simply be trimmed out, undetectable by most people. So when you're creating digital objects for AV, don't be a Nixon. There should be nothing missing from the middle of your files, and full transparency for any problems that come up during digitization. By the same token, don't combine files without telling the researcher. As tempting as it is to splice both sides of an audio cassette into one file, or present a single video for an interview that spans 3 VHS tapes, it muddies context and blurs the constraints of the original media which inform choices made by the creator. Still, there are rare cases at the Briscoe where we make an exception and combine files for clarity. We call these composites, and use them for capture problems from the same analog item. So if a film breaks or glitches as happened earlier, we either continue on and keep the raw file, or go back to the beginning and recapture the entire reel as we did earlier, deleting the first file completely. Or, if that's not possible, we use a composite file, keeping the first digital object and creating a second digitization for the rest of the film, then combining those into a third digital object, the composite. And all 3 files are kept in our digital media repository, with notes on the problems encountered during capture and the ability to trace back the composite to its source files. We also use composites for combining production elements like the math films we're digitizing into an easily watchable video. And let's get back to those, and out of the abstract. Our last step is to wind this film back onto its core. So we'll place the reel on the left side of the winder with its core and split reel on the right. And you'll notice I'm winding a little faster than usual, and I'm giving it more tension, because I want that momentum to give a tight, uniform wind. Then when I'm finished, I'll add some hold-down tape to keep it that way, and then write that unique identifier we use for the file name on the leader that I've added, never on the original film. I'm not adding a title or anything interpretive, because I don't want to leave confusion about creator notes versus my own. And all that stuff will be in our metadata record, which will be mapped to our identifier, and the identifier will also be printed on the film can's label. So even if the film somehow gets separated from the can, it can find its way home. We're now done with the original film, and we'll have it boxed up, barcoded, and sent to our offsite library storage facility. And now we have all the production elements digitized, and that's great, but is it useful? You tell me. Is this meaningful? Is this meaningful?
Okay. In 1917, a Japanese mathematician, S. Kakeya, published a twin problem.
For most researchers, I would say not yet. Let's assemble these into a composite digital object for access. This is where our careful digitization of the original leader will pay off. We can use those same synchronization punch holes and sync marks in our video editing program to line up the picture and sound reels just like the films would have been lined up on a ganger to make a print. I'm working in Adobe Premiere, but most video editing programs should work. Usually this just works. but there are cases where there are no synchronization marks and I have to do it by hand. Again, I disclose this, and we're saying clearly that we assembled this, and the originals and their digital derivatives are all saved in other places.
In 1917, a Japanese mathematician, S. Kakeya, published a twin problem.
Alright, we don't want to do this again, so I'm going to save as close to the original file specs as possible, and then I'm going to save a lower quality MP4 access file for online streaming. And I'm also going to take screenshots for the master metadata record and streaming access site. And so far, I'm not saving these Adobe working files I make when assembling, because I have no faith that they'll be playable in the future, but let me know if I should reconsider. You'll notice I'm not burning a DVD. Here's why. DVDs require recompression to fit the video, which takes a lot of computer processing time, degrades the image, and gives kind of a false sense of preservation. This is a lot of time and effort to put into something that isn't even a preservation quality item. In a test I did with a worker paid $11 an hour, I found burning DVDs with fully optimized conditions of batch processing the compression overnight to come out to $3.59 per disc, in addition to the cost of the media, which itself is already more expensive than hard drive storage at this point. And it's time and effort that doesn't contribute to the description of the item and needs to be refreshed every few years. I would rather put that money towards improving our digital infrastructure. What we do now is provide streaming access online for any items with no restrictions, and then bring restricted video files on demand to our reading room portal computer. And let's talk about streaming access at the Briscoe. We're using a rich media system called Glyphos, which has a good amount of users in South and Central America and Austin, Texas, but hasn't really taken hold anywhere else in the United States, which is a shame because their time text system works really well for us. And what is time text? Time text could be subtitles, closed captions, a synchronized transcript, named markers in a broadcast WAV file, a creator's edit decision list, chapters in a DVD, or a simple table of contents for a video, simply saying, at this time, this event is happening. We use two main types of time text in Glyphos, transcripts and tables of contents. We found transcripts take about 6 to 8 times the length of the original media item to make, so we don't make those in most cases. But if they do exist in digital form, it only takes us about 1.5 times the length of the media to synchronize them. Tables of contents, or TOCs, also take us about 1.5 times the length of the original media, but even less if we take time notes during capture. So everything we put online has a TOC, some more detailed than others. And Glyphos has flagship pages with a lot more features like interactive maps and timelines, pictures attached to media, and multiple digital objects on a page. But we don't use that stuff. It just adds complications. It would make us more dependent on Glyphos. And we're not investing into that system or perfect pages. We're investing in our AV description. Right now there is an amazing amount of development for archival tools, and I think carefully choosing and scoping what you need from them and then defining your functional requirements are among the most crucial decisions you make. More than anything, we don't want to put anything into any system that we can't easily get back out. And that's what I like more than anything about Glyphos. Even though it's not open source, the code for the time text is straightforward XML, and it's absurdly close to the W3C time text markup language standard. So with a simple batch export and XML transform, we feel confident that our time text will persist into whatever the next system is. Let's make some time text. We've got a page created for our Kakeya problem composite, and our access copy video is uploaded to the streaming server. We're going to add a table of contents for the video. So as opposed to a transcript, which captures all the words in the professor's lecture, what we're looking for is the structure of the video. On-screen titles, topic changes, graphics, and animations. Anytime things change, we want to give a heads up to the researcher so they can quickly scan through the video to find what they're looking for. If you think of the video as a box, what we're trying to do is describe the folders in it. My rule of thumb is I try to make sure I document any changes within 3 to 5 minutes. But if it isn't there, I don't write it. These lecture films are a little harder to describe than most things I do, as I majored in English literature and then information studies in part to avoid math of this caliber. But let's take a look.
Published in mathematics for an elementary triangle. The union of segments of all direct
And this is not a set-in-stone description. We're giving the structure of the media and providing access, but welcoming new information, corrections, and identifications of people and places. You should note, too, that I'm displaying the films in the 2 separate parts it came in, with leader included. This is not only for authenticity for the researcher, but also to keep this time text that we're investing our resources in persistently useful. If I were to trim the leader off, then combine the 2 reels into one video, our timed index would no longer relate to our master file, making our work kind of useless beyond glyphos. I don't mean to harp, but with time-based media, time matters. So from this process, I'll end up with a good understanding of the item, and I'll fill in the Dublin core description field from that. The description field is, to my shame, one of those catch-all fields that I use to capture everything that doesn't fit into our standardized schema. To parse this in the future, I at least have a format for this section. 1. Content description, in order of relevance for researchers. I include keywords, events, and prominent people that appear or are mentioned in the video. I'm also going to save a short keyword version of this to add to the finding aid later. 2. Notes on the analog source. This is the place for all the writing on the leader and can that we've been gathering in our spreadsheet. I actually have a batch command that transforms my spreadsheet fields into sentence form. That sounds like I'm bragging. 3. Explanation of problems encountered during digitization or preservation issues with source material. This is for authenticity and a note for researchers why things may look glitchy. And then finally 4. Description of adjustments made to the file, as in the case of adjusting the color on an internegative or explaining a composite file. Again, this is for authenticity. Then I'm going to fill out the rest of the fields based on what I've learned and pulling from the spreadsheet that I made when I was surveying the films. Then I save and exit the page, and we now have an accessible streaming video. For description, we have one more place for metadata. Our Digital Media Repository, or DMR, which is actually our master metadata record. I saved this for last because the glyphos indexing process enriches the metadata so much. So we're going to transfer all those glyphos fields over. Then we'll fill out a few more that are unique to the DMR for management of the digital object. And now, our metadata and access copy is safe. But what do we do with those master files? We've been really lucky in the last year to start making the Texas Advanced Computing Center our home for digital storage. It's not yet a full-fledged trusted digital repository, but the files are automatically mirrored to 2 geographically disparate locations, and the storage cost is the best we've found by far. And now for our final step, we want to tie our digital objects in with our finding aid, so I'm adding an alt form available tag for the composite version to the series. I use the convention digitized as, followed by the identifier, then a link to the DMR record. And since this has a video on glyphos, a click for video option will populate on the DMR record page, which the user can click to go right to the glyphos page. And once the finding aid is live, the films are available for researchers, whether in our reading room or anywhere with an internet connection. And that, in excruciating detail, is how we process, digitize, and describe film at the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History up to now. Hopefully I've left you with some insight into the factors that shaped our process, so you can shape yours. If you have any corrections or questions, my email address is justinkovar@utexas.edu, and I'm @KovarSound on social media. Thank you for watching.